You don't need more medication. You need to remember who you are. What if everything they labeled as a disorder was actually your soul trying to break free? What if the racing thoughts, the trembling hands, the sleepless nights weren't signs of weakness, but proof that something within you is waking up? For years, they told you it was anxiety. They told you to calm down, breathe, take this pill, go back to normal. But what if normal was the problem? What if your so-called symptoms were the sacred symptoms of transformation, the unraveling of a false self you were never meant to carry? You weren't losing your mind. You were losing your mask. And no one told you how lonely that would feel. They didn't explain that spiritual awakenings don't start with enlightenment. They begin with collapse. That behind every panic attack, there's often an identity crumbling. Behind every moment of despair, there's a door opening to a deeper self. Carl Jung called it individuation, the path of becoming whole. But the world wasn't ready for that truth, so they called it anxiety. In this video, you'll finally see the bigger picture, the patterns, the meaning, the hidden intelligence behind your breakdowns. This isn't about fixing you. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. It's not just spiritual, it's practical, it's psychological, it's survival-level wisdom. If you've ever felt like something deeper was going on inside you, you're right. And this is your permission to stop hiding from it. You're not too sensitive. You're not too broken. You're awakening. And now, it's time to understand what that really means. The confusion between crisis and awakening. There's a moment in life when everything starts to feel off. Not just a bad day or a rough patch, but a strange inner trembling, a feeling that something big is shifting. Suddenly, anxiety spikes for no reason, sleep becomes elusive, and your mind loops through fears you can't quite name. Traditional medicine might label it a disorder, but deep within, the psyche is staging a rebellion. It's not dysfunction. It's the human mind unraveling the lies it once called truth. Carl Jung would call this the beginning of individuation, when the self dares to rise through the cracks of a breaking identity. You start questioning everything: your job, your relationships, your beliefs. What once gave you comfort now feels hollow. This confusion isn't random. It's the inner life demanding attention. Philosophy calls this the art of living, facing your illusions and walking through the fire of not knowing. The psyche isn't malfunctioning, it's transforming. When the shadow stirs, it shakes the ego to its core. Anxiety becomes a symptom, not of sickness, but of an emerging soul seeking to break free from the numbness of conformity. Think of someone who lived for years in a career that paid well, but drained them. One day, they wake up with a panic attack, and it feels like their world is crumbling. But what if that was the soul whispering that they're not aligned? Psychoanalysis doesn't dismiss symptoms, it reads them. That feeling of collapse? It's often the first step toward true spiritual awakening. Energy shifts, sensibility heightens. What used to make sense starts to fall apart. But that's exactly where new perception begins to grow. The mind, trained to control and categorize, freaks out when the rules stop working. But this inner chaos isn't a bug. It's a feature of transformation. Fear is just a gatekeeper. Behind it lies freedom. This is when the ego starts screaming because it senses its end is near. It resists, labels the process as madness, and tightens its grip. But the self, the real you, has already begun to stir. The confusion? That's the veil being lifted. That's the soul entering the conversation. You're not losing yourself. You're finally hearing the part of you that was buried beneath performance and programming. And just like that, what seemed like a breakdown becomes a sacred invitation. Your conscience is waking up. Your perception is shifting. The system inside is starting to reboot, but not in the way the world taught you. This is no ordinary confusion. It's the disorientation before expansion. The fear, the restlessness, the sudden waves of dread. They're not signs of failure. but the opening notes of a new inner symphony. And soon, that very collapse will begin to reveal what the ego fears most, that it was never in control to begin with. The collapse is ego deprogramming. When life begins to fall apart, most people panic. And who could blame them? The identity they built over years, careers, titles, stories, habits, starts to feel foreign. But what if the collapse isn't punishment, but initiation? Carl Jung taught that the journey toward individuation demands confrontation with the false self. The old identity must crack open for the soul to breathe. The shadow doesn't destroy you. It reveals what you're not. This isn't anxiety. It's ego detox. You're not breaking down. You're being peeled back to something real. The fear you feel is the ego losing ground. It's like a dethroned king throwing tantrums in a crumbling palace. Your mind races, emotions spiral, and your body vibrates like it's trying to shake something loose because it is. The collapse is the release of an outdated version of yourself. Spirituality isn't always gentle. Sometimes it arrives like a storm, stripping away every illusion you mistook for safety. And what's left? Rawness, sensibility, truth. The self emerges not from comfort, but from chaos wisely endured. People often rush to fix the symptoms, medicate the anxiety, silence the overthinking, numb the restlessness. But what if those are messengers, not problems? This phase asks you to pause, not patch. Books like The Untethered Soul or Man's Search for Meaning can offer perspective, but the real lesson comes from staying present with the unraveling. Rather than resisting, try journaling every morning before speaking to anyone. Write what the ego is clinging to, what it fears losing, then read it back. You'll start to see the lies for what they are, defense mechanisms of a past identity. In this liminal space, the mind becomes a battlefield. One part of you clings to the old, another whispers of something greater. But the old has weight. It's routine, predictable. So of course letting go feels like dying. The psyche is in labor, and labor is messy, loud, terrifying, but it's how new life enters. The soul doesn't speak in logic. It speaks in breakdowns, synchronicities, and silent knowing. If you're feeling like nothing makes sense anymore, congratulations. You're finally starting to see beyond the programming. And here's the twist. The breakdown never meant you were broken. It meant you were too whole to keep pretending. What felt like insanity was simply the system of your ego reaching its limits. The truth is, if you surrender to it fully, you might discover a level of presence your old self couldn't even imagine. But don't get comfortable just yet, because now that the false self is dissolving, the real work begins. The symptoms will deepen, the inner world will shift even more. Psycho-spiritual symptoms of awakening. One morning you wake up and something feels off. Not wrong, just different. The light looks sharper. You hear a song, and it cracks something open in you. The world hasn't changed, but somehow you have. Welcome to the sensory chaos of awakening. This is the terrain Carl Jung warned us about. The moment when the human mind begins to loosen its grip and let the self emerge. You start seeing signs, synchronicities that are too weird to be coincidence. You might feel like you're floating outside your body or dreaming while awake. You're not going crazy. You're tuning in. Sensibility skyrockets. The smell of a candle can flood you with memories. A stranger's glance can spark tears. The veil is thinning, and with it, the illusion of control. As your inner life expands, the outer world starts to lose its grip. You walk through your day feeling like a ghost in someone else's story. That disorientation, it's a good sign. It means your perception is shifting beyond the ego's tight lens. Psychoanalysis might label it depersonalization, but spirituality recognizes it as the self preparing to take center stage. These symptoms don't show up in neat little boxes. Some days your energy vanishes, your limbs tremble, or your skin tingles like it's plugged into an invisible current. That's not just biology, it's transformation. The body is part of the awakening, too. You may crave solitude, nature, silence, or even intense movement like dance or breath work. Listen, the body has its own language. It's responding to the energetic reconfiguration happening within. And no, you don't need to fix it. You need to allow it. That's the art of living. Jung spoke of participating consciously in your own becoming. Let me give you something practical. Start a log of your symptoms. Not just what you feel, but what's happening around you when they arise. Track the patterns. You'll begin to see how deeply your inner dialogue shapes your energy. You'll notice that after emotional conversations or time in crowded spaces, your system vibrates differently. That's not hypersensitivity. That's perception in high definition. It's the birth of the intuitive self, the soul claiming space inside a nervous system that used to be on autopilot. And it's in this fragile, electric phase that many begin to wonder if they're losing touch with reality. But that question itself is a sign you're awakening to a new one. The psyche is reconfiguring. The old structures are falling. And just as you're starting to grasp this new level of seeing, another shadow creeps in, a deeper, more haunting question. Am I going insane, or am I finally becoming who I was always meant to be? The loneliness and the fear of going insane. Nobody warns you that awakening can feel like abandonment. One day you're surrounded by people, and the next, even in a crowd, you feel alone. Not because you've been left, but because your inner landscape has changed so drastically. No one seems to speak your language anymore. Carl Jung understood this isolation well. He called it the journey of the self, where the individual must step outside collective norms to find their truth. And that road, it's quiet, haunting, and filled with the echo of your own thoughts. This silence isn't empty, it's charged. But when you don't understand what's happening, the mind panics. Am I broken? Is this madness? No, friend. It's the soul breaking through the static of the ego. The fear of going insane isn't a symptom of sickness. It's a signal that the old world no longer holds you. Psychoanalysis speaks of the crisis of meaning. And this is it. When none of your previous stories work, and you're standing in the rawness of spiritual nakedness. A kind of inner crisis that no pill, podcast, or productivity hack can fix. It's in this phase that many feel tempted to return to the illusion, to numb out, scroll endlessly, chase distractions. But the discomfort isn't your enemy, it's your guide. Think of the mystics, the artists, the visionaries. They all walked through this night. You're not lost. You're in initiation. And yes, it's scary, but you're not alone. Millions walk this path in silence, carrying the same secret. I feel like I'm losing my mind, but deep down, I know I'm finding something greater. That inner whisper, that's not delusion. That's the conscience waking up. If you're here, pause. Let yourself be still. Go off-grid for a day. Leave the phone. Walk barefoot. Read something sacred. The Red Book, Letters to a Young Poet, The Way of the Peaceful Warrior. Journal not just to write, but to listen. Ask, what part of me is trying to be born? What part is afraid of dying? Let your inner dialogue spill out. The fear begins to shrink when it's brought into the light. And ironically, it's in the stillness of solitude that we meet the most alive part of our humanity, the soul. But right as you begin to breathe into that silence, when the noise begins to fade and the ache starts to soften, something shifts. The fear begins to give way to clarity. A subtle knowing arises. The realization that this was never about losing your mind, but shedding it. And that perhaps the pain wasn't a punishment. It was a preparation for something far more luminous, intimate, and unshakably real. Awakening as spiritual rebirth. At first, it felt like anxiety. The tight chest, the racing heart, the paralyzing fog. But underneath all that noise was something holy trying to break through. Carl Jung said that what we resist persists, and what we repress becomes our fate. What if your anxiety was never a malfunction, but a message, a sacred alarm from the soul, warning that the path you were on no longer aligned with who you truly are? The symptom wasn't the problem, it was the invitation. And the awakening, it was hiding in plain sight. You were never broken. You were becoming. The collapse wasn't the end, it was the clearing. Spirituality doesn't always come dressed in white robes and incense. Sometimes it wears the face of burnout, heartbreak, or panic attacks. The psyche, in its wisdom, dismantles what no longer serves so that something more truthful can rise. The shadow doesn't just show you what you fear, it reveals the map to your transformation. When the ego steps aside, the self begins to build its home in the body. Slowly, your energy shifts, your perception expands. You begin to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. But this rebirth isn't a moment, it's a process. 1,000 tiny deaths and subtle resurrections. One day you're crying in the shower. The next, you're laughing alone in your kitchen, remembering what joy felt like. You're not healing in the linear sense. You're unlearning, peeling, softening into presence. This is the individuation process in motion, the slow integration of the shadow and the self. It's messy, confusing, and wildly beautiful. You don't need a guru. You need a mirror and the courage to face it. Try this. Spend a morning doing nothing. No phone, no goals, no expectations. Just sit with yourself. Feel what arises. If emotions come, let them. If inspiration visits, write it down. Light a candle, not for a ritual, but as a symbol of your own return. Pick up Women Who Run with the Wolves or the Book of Awakening. Let their pages meet you where you are. You're not chasing enlightenment. You're remembering how to feel. And in that remembrance, something new is born. And what's being born isn't another version of the old you. It's something untouched, something ancient, a clarity the mind could never manufacture. The soul doesn't shout, it hums. And now that you've heard it, you can't unhear it. The fear was a cocoon. The confusion was labor. And this subtle, radiant awareness blooming from your chest, this is your rebirth. But hold on, because what comes next isn't about survival anymore. It's about creation. So now that you've seen the truth behind your symptoms, the question becomes, what are you going to do with it? You can't unknow what you know. The whispers of your soul won't go silent again. The anxiety, the collapse, the confusion, they weren't random. They were the first knocks of awakening, the beginning of your individuation. So will you keep pretending it's all just stress? Or will you finally start listening to the self behind the noise? It's time to stop fearing your depth. That trembling you feel, it's your old identity dying. That disorientation, it's your inner life reorganizing. You don't need to be fixed. You need to be met. Met with courage, with compassion, with awareness. The path ahead isn't easy, but it's real, and it's yours. So ask yourself, what part of me have I been silencing? What would happen if I finally honored my energy, my perception, my inner dialogue instead of pathologizing it? If this resonated with you, if something stirred in you, don't let it fade. Share your experience in the comments below. What part of your awakening felt like a breakdown? What helped you get through it? Let's build a space for real conversation, real healing, and real transformation. And if you're ready to go deeper, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Because this is just the beginning. Your rebirth deserves to be witnessed.